you see in someone's home that told you, yep, they're rich? Story 1. A kid I was friends with in high school. His parents had a new house custom built. Huge house, custom woodwork, beautiful details throughout. Very expensive. I used to go over and hang out with my friend, swim in the pool, watch movies in their theater, etc. But despite all that, the thing that stood out to me was this. One day I walk in, and there's a brand new Steinway grand piano in the living room. His mom says she wanted to learn to play the piano, so they bought one. I play piano. Steinway pianos are amazing. They play beautifully and sound wonderful. Every Steinway piano is handmade in only one of 2 locations in the world. They're like the Rolls-Royce of pianos. This piano probably cost over $100,000, and they bought one just because she wanted to learn to play. Story 2. Not even wine in their house. Was driving to their home and was looking for which side street off the main road they were on when GPS said, "You've arrived." But I saw no house. Made a U-turn and realized the side street was actually their 4-mile driveway. Story 3. Once a friend invited me to go with him to his family farm for the holidays. I was driving and it was a long drive. Once we were inside a dirt road that was simply endless. 40 minutes and I asked when to get to the property. He looked confused and said, "We've been at the property for the last 40 minutes. Basically the farmland 100k acres big. This was in Argentina. Story 4. Visiting friends and my wife sees a bronze sculpture of a cowboy on the coffee table and says, "Gee, that looks like a Remington." And our hostess says, "Yeah, it is." Story 5. College friend who had a thick southern accent and generally put out a country boy vibe, though he lived in the DC suburbs of Maryland. Invited us to his parents' house on the border of West Virginia so we could go skiing at Snowshoe. We figured, tar paper shack. The 3-story wall of windows looking out on 300 feet of frontage on Deep Creek Lake was a giveaway that country boy was not what he seemed. On a sad note, I'm going to his memorial party on Friday. He passed away in a freak home accident on Jan. 3. I've known him now for almost 40 years. This is the big get-together of his college friends. His funeral was small, family only. And it will be a year party fierce, because he was the kind of guy who inspired that, expecting over 100 equally close friends to attend. Story 6. They bought 2 apartments and turned them into one huge unit. Walls were torn down, plumbing was modified, etc. They also had a room with separate temperature and humidity control that was used as a wine cellar. Story 7. I work at real estate and sold a 4-story warehouse to this guy. He was really laid back and paid like $600K for it. I told him I wanted to come back when he remodeled it. About 18 months later, he called and said he's done, and to come by. The first floor was a bunch of exotic cars, had an elevator. The top floor was his master bedroom, and the roof was his patio. This was the greatest bachelor pad I've ever been in. Story 8. I was driving to a classmate's house for a school project. I drove up and knocked. No one answered. I called, and she answered. I explained I was at their front door. She said, "Oh, you're probably at the barn. Keep driving up the hill, you'll see the house." By house, she meant chateau. Turns out her dad was from Switzerland and owned several construction companies. Their house was actually featured on the show Grimm featured in the Portland, Oregon area. They were super kind, and I became like an adopted son. I loved house sitting for them. Story 9. I was bartending a July 4th party on his outdoor rooftop bar. $300 bottles of champagne, Miller Lights, obscure Sonoma Valley Reds, pricey tequila. After the party, I was breaking everything down. He came out on the deck with me to kick it and was hitting a solid gold weed pen. We were having a beer and sharing the pen. He casually dropped like it was a speeding ticket that the glass windows in the house cost $2. 5 millimeters. This was his beach house. Edit. He was not the wealthiest person in the neighborhood. One of his neighbors had a Van Gogh in their living room. Story 10. I grew up poor and always thought the epitome of making it was if someone had an ice maker in their fridge freezer. I'm now 45 and am living in my first ever house with an ice maker. It's awesome. Story 11. I went to the private high school all the extremely wealthy kids go to in a major US city despite not being one. The most ostentatious thing I saw in any of my friends' homes was the guest house had a full-sized vintage race car in the living room. Story 12. Did work on a summer home for $3 million. Did the ventilation on that house that sat on a cliff by the ocean? The house was double the size of an average home. An infinity pool that was heated all year. Mind you that it is in Sweden where winters can get quite cold. Don't want to know the cost for having it heated all year? The chandelier at the main hall did cost around 20 KOs, and not a single sharp edge on the house. Every wall was curved in some way. Story 13. They built a second house next to theirs with a bridge connecting them over the driveway so their two kids could have their own house and not bother the parents. Also, another friend of mine had his rich next-door neighbors buy his parents' house and demolished it so they could have a bigger yard. Story 14. For official use only, do not reproduce, on an otherwise unmarked DVD. It was a movie that wasn't out yet that was going to be nominated for the Oscars. Made me realize that my friend's mom was kind of a big deal. Story 15. Happy family. Everyone is happy, clean clothes, food seems plentiful. Not saying that every rich family is happy, but having money really fixes a lot of stressors in life. Story 16. The DeLorean in his garage was kind of a hint, but the easily $25,000 huge ear amethyst crystals he had in his living room as a gewgaw sort of underscored it, not to mention the original Picasso on the wall. Story 17. His grandfather's greatcoat, dinner jacket, and dress shoes, all meticulously maintained and well used. Also, the house in question is a 15th century manor, and the accompanying land comprises a significant chunk of the county it's in. He claimed he was rather poor, whilst having a cellar full of fine wines and a safe full of diamond jewelry. Story 18. This isn't something I noticed immediately, but I visited a mansion once, and the owner was telling me about his HVAC system. He has a geothermal HVAC system, which basically means that they had to dig multiple wells underground, 90 feet into the earth, because the air down there is always a constant temperature. He said they drilled 9 of these wells in total. So basically, they are using the temperature of the earth to heat and cool their house. The whole system cost him $100K. Of all the crazy stuff in that house, this one fascinated me the most. Story 19. A girl had me over for homework or something. Huge house. Lots of land. Anyways, she asked me what I wanted to drink. I said, Diet Coke. And she goes, oh, just press the Diet Coke button. And pointed behind her to the intercom system I had failed to see when I went in. There was legit a Diet Coke button on the intercom in every room. Pressed it, and her butler came upstairs with a Diet Coke in under 5 minutes. She also had a Hot Pocket button in her room. Wild. Story 20. I used to deliver food to this guy that lived in a mansion. His family owned a propane company and a bank. The first time I delivered to his huge house on a mountain, there was a gated driveway, and he had a life-size knight in his entryway once he opened the door. I was like, yeah, this guy's got money. On a different delivery there, he gave me a $53 tip on a $47 order. Best tip I ever got. Story 21. My husband, as a child, used to think that if someone had a banana hanger, they must be rich. I got him a banana hanger one day for his birthday and said, you made it, babe. Story 22. There is art at the front entry. As in, you open the door and there is a Picasso painting staring at you. Not a print, an original. We have family friends who were quite wealthy in the 1980s. She collected a lot of art, paintings, drawings, statues, and sculptures. She always had great taste. Now they are very old, they sold their houses, and have given away most of the art to their kids and other family. They had an abstract sculpture of a woman's head I always loved as a child. The two sides look completely different. Very cubist, and I thought it was a Picasso, like the big painting. Years later, I mentioned that it was my favorite of the sculptures. Her. What Picasso? Me. The woman's face, the square one. Her. Honey, that's not a Picasso. It was by a local artist, and she had bought it at a local gallery because she fell in love with it as well. Doesn't matter, still love it. Today, it's in my living room, on a rotating plinth. She remembered. Story 23. I used to clean houses 10 years ago, so some of this may no longer be true, but these are my observations. Rich people still have landline phones. Typically, they'll have at least one cordless phone on every floor. Rich people are pretty old-fashioned when it comes to a lot of things. Like they'll have analog clocks instead of digital ones. The guest bedroom that they don't even use will have its own bathroom. They have a ton of small framed pictures in every room and lots of knickknacks that will break if you as much as look at them wrong. They freak out if they think you scratch their stove or some other appliance that's made out of stainless steel. Stuff like that will ruin their day. I never once saw a desktop computer. Rich people will be convinced that their house is a disgusting mess when it's actually pretty much spotless. Our office was located directly across from a homeless camp. It was always pretty jarring to go from seeing that to being in a house that had 6 full-size bathrooms. Working there made me realize that the rich live in a completely different world from the rest of us. Story 24. Aesop soap in the guest bath. And not in the Aesop bottles. It was a pretty nice house, but not extravagant. And the dude was a car guy with a handful of older cars he was working on. So, pretty well off, but nothing that screamed money until I went to use the restroom. Have you ever used hand soap that just felt expensive? So I asked what kind it was. I looked it up later. It's like $50 a bottle. Who spends that for the hall bathroom? I can't even imagine what they had in the master bath. Story 25. This one is really silly, but went to a boss's house for a team party. Whole thing was catered by their pervert chef. Then we went downstairs to check out his whiskey collection. Had a bottle that was unearthed on a dude's property dated back to the Civil War. We each got to try like half a shot, basically a sip. Then we went to his garage, and it was full of pinball machines and arcade games. I half-jokingly asked, "Where's your Ferrari, dude?" Because I knew he owned one. He straight-faced said, "I own a townhouse across the street and park it there because my driveway here is too steep and it bottoms out." All that said, very nice and generous host, just rich as. Story 26. Their fence is the best indicator in rural areas. Steel pipe fence, money wood fence, upper middle class wire fence. Family just trying to get by like the rest of us. Story 27. When I was a little kid, my sister was friends with a girl who had a rich family. There were multiple Christmas trees with presents under them and a big walk-in closet full of more presents. It was just 2 little girls and their parents. The girls had so many presents to open that they would start on Christmas Eve and end the day after Christmas. They would literally get to the point where they got bored opening presents and just wanted to play with the toys they had already opened. Story 28. 24K gold Gucci. Door handles to enter their penthouse, which overlooked a famous PGA golf course. Of course, this was after I was flown in on their private jet, after I was picked up in their Rolls-Royce limousine. My driver wore cap, tuxedo with tails, and white leather driving gloves. Like in the movies. I was treated like a princess over a long weekend. It really made it difficult to fly back to my measly apartment, change into my nursing whites, and do a 12-hour night shift the day I returned home. All of that because I took care of a family member who had been hospitalized, and they wanted to thank me for my compassion and care. I did nothing extraordinary but give care to a rather sick grandparent. The same kind of care I hope my own grandparents would receive if they were hospitalized. Story 29. I went to high school with a girl who once casually mentioned while we were at her house that the large bone we were looking at on the wall was actually a mammoth femur that her dad insisted on buying from some museum by offering them some obscene amount of money they couldn't refuse. I, of course, have no way of fact-checking this, but it felt like such a random thing for a teenage girl to make up that we all believed it, and they officially became the richest people we knew. Story 30. Their house has a smell. You walk in and it's void of mold, pet, dander, etc. Every house smells like the people who live in it, but rich houses don't smell like that. It's a mixture of fresh flowers, if they were expecting people to stop by, cleaners, from the regular cleaning crew, and whatever is around the air intake outside. You can be rich and not have your house smell like wealth, but the rich for multiple generations, and we have trusts up the wazoo to ensure it stays that way, will never smell musty. Story 31. Befriended the staff of a yacht docked in the marina in St. Thomas, USVI. They had sailed the yacht over from Europe, and the owners were going to fly over in a few days. Went and visited them, the staff, on the yacht one evening. On the wall of the living room was an Andy Warhol portrait of the owner's wife. Story 32. When I was a kid, I thought that the family up the street were rich because they always had a big jar of pistachios. The large house and pool were likely the bigger hint. Story 33. I looked up the address on Google Street View before I arrived and saw that it was in a row of pretty swank-looking townhomes. When I got inside, I realized that all of those townhomes were in fact one giant house. Story 34. I'll go first. One of my clients lived in a beach house with a heated bathroom floor. The floor was heated. To clarify, I had never seen this before and haven't seen it since. Story 35. Their home. When I was in elementary school, I visited a classmate's home. Their living room was larger than my parents' entire house. Our house would have fit in the living room of their house. Their garage held 6 cars, the swimming pool was bigger than our living room. Their kitchen was as big as our living room and kitchen put together. The house faced the Pacific Ocean, and the entire front of the house was floor-to-ceiling windows. I never went back to that house. I just remembered too, my mom used to clean houses. I went with her one day and she had a house that she regularly cleaned. They had an indoor koi pond with a bridge over the pond and a fountain in one end, the pond in the living room. The pond was made from black quartz and black marble slabs. Story 36. My wife and I were just talking about things that used to tell you that people were rich, but are pretty common now. The convo started because we installed CCTV cameras around our house. If I saw that in the 90s, I'd have thought that person had money. Same thing with big TVs. Story 37 went to at the time. My fiance's parents, best friends home for dinner. Walked into a spectacular copper-filled chef kitchen with every accoutrement imaginable. Complete with very large opened wood-firing oven, as well as a ginormous natural burning fireplace. Then to find, I was only inside kitchen, not the main yausa. Story 38. Kitchen trash cans. Poor, old bag or box used as a trash can. Lower middle, shower plastic trash can in the corner. Middle, metal trash can in the corner. Upper middle, trash built into the cabinets. Trash pull-out drawer. Rich, no trash can. Either the staff cleans up after themselves and takes out the garbage daily, or the actual cooking is done in a separate kitchen, not the display kitchen. Story 39. Pulling up to my son's friend's beach house, Ocean City, NJ. I asked which apartment did he live in. Nope, it was all one huge home. His parents just bought it for 2. Sarks, 5 bedrooms, 6 baths, porches on every floor overlooking the bay on one side and the beach on the other, with a rooftop full 360 view of everything. House next door was for sale if I ever will the lottery. Story 40. A lot smaller and a lower level of rich, but a house that's perfectly clean. No clutter, no mess. Looks like it's ready for a magazine shoot. That takes time. To keep it that clean permanently shows that they have time to spare. At the level I grew up, that amount of spare time without a second job meant they were rich. Story 41. A free vending machine in their billiards room. Both the vending machine and the fact that they had a billiards room. Like, what is this? A game of Clue? Story 42. When I see large designer-level kitchens with every amenity you could think of, yet nobody in the house actually cooks, that's rich. More than one couple we know fit this description. Story 43. A observatory. Like straight up just on their roof. A movie theater and a bar in the basement with indoor ventilation. For smoking inside. A cigar lounge. A wine cellar. Not a small one neither. A tennis court. A swimming pool. One of those stoves, but like huge with 10 burners or some. All of this in one house, mind you. Rich people pisses me off. Story 44. It was either the jeweled egg or the 13th century woodcut Bible. The fact that both were in museum-quality glass cases in their library, which was larger than the home I grew up in, was also a bit of a clue. I briefly dated a girl whose parents were very wealthy. Father founded a company you've heard of. It didn't work out, but I could have been retired by now if it had. Story 45. Google Maps, and drove to what essentially looked like Downton Abbey. There was an authentic rodent on the side table. I walked around you, my hands clasped behind my back. They made a great martini, though. Story 46. A squash court. Went to a kid's house for a party in high school, on a lake, and they asked if we wanted to play dodgeball. We said, sure. So we went inside the house and played dodgeball. Some of the kids watched from the elevated private viewing lounge area with tinted glass instead. Story 47. There was 50 M plus worth of art hanging on the walls. All originals: Basquiat, Picasso, Keith Haring, Damien Hirst, Romero Brito. Name an artist whose work is worth millions. There was one on a wall somewhere. Story 48. Audiophile. A turntable that was spun by an air compressor rather than an electric motor, along with speakers the size of a refrigerator. Didn't get a look at whatever preamps, amps, and equalizers he may have been using. Story 49. Just a few I can think of. A lot of stained glass windows, candles everywhere, three-story tall ceilings, a butler who wears ornate robes, a little box to confess your sins in. Story 50. I live in a very affluent town, and I was driving my kid to a birthday party at a friend's house, a friend from class. As we pulled up the driveway at the top of the mountain, next to their 6-car garage was a helipad. I mean, the town is nice, but I didn't realize there were parts of it that were that nice. Story 51-1. The Park Avenue address. 2. The livery-clad doorman who was vacuuming the lobby when we arrived at 1 a.m., who bent down to pick up a piece of detritus that wouldn't vacuum, and placed it in his pocket for later disposal. 3. The elevator lobby on the top floor having only one apartment for. Upon entry to this penthouse, noticing the stairs that led to the second floor of the Park Avenue duplex penthouse. 5. The accommodations for me and my friend, which were each a separate suite, with bedroom, bathroom, dressing room, and living room. Side note, they also made a point of showing us the floor-to-ceiling cupboard that was filled with handles of bottom-shelf, plastic jug vodka before serving us Dom Perignon and Iranian Osetra caviar. Story 52. Diorama of taxidermy lions sitting in a faux savanna scene in their entrance hall. They were big game hunters for fun and had a few of their kills stuffed and set up like you would see in a museum. Story 53. I can't compare to most of these, having grown up in relatively poor areas and currently living in a very poor area. But for me, the richest home I walked into just felt luxurious. I don't know brands, but every wall had a perfectly placed custom artwork. All the furniture was either real leather or plushy fabric. There were sculptures and nooks and decorations just so. The master bedroom had an odd-shaped giant window feature, and it had custom-fitted blackout shades that looked great. The host casually served us a $50 steak, which was grilled perfectly. But he couldn't cook very well apart from that. He went nuts over my homemade baked goods, though, and practically inhaled 1 or 2 of an angel food cake. Story 54. In high school, being friends with someone for years and going to their house maybe on hundreds of times, and only meeting or seeing their parents at most a couple of times, if ever. Story 55. When I was in Eastern Europe, a family I was visiting to have papers designed had built an 12-foot-tall brick fence around their 40-acre property. I couldn't even see the main house because we met at their gatehouse. Story 56. My friend's parents kept a very nice apartment for him to go to on the weekends when we were in college. They lived in NYC and it was not their place or anything, just a home, so he didn't have to stay on campus if he didn't want. A maid came several times a week and someone to play with and feed his cat. There was a statue that got delivered there once in a crate from Italy. It was a poodle from some ancient sculptor, waiting to be put on a pedestal on display. You know, no big deal. Story 57. Lives in a ski resort area. Loves smoking cigars outside. Loves being bare feet. Had a heated floor installed on his balcony, terrace, so he can smoke barefooted outside even by 5C LMAO. Story 58. I grew up near what is now Silicon Valley in the 80s, so we knew a lot of the original .com tycoons. My brother's friend lived in the house originally built owned by Bob Swanson, founder of Genentech. This house was so big, my brother got lost and had to call for help on the intercom system. So you know you're rich when people have to call for rescue to find their way out of your house. LOL. Story 59. A kid I went to middle school with moved about 30 miles and took their house BC. It was one that George Washington stayed in and was sentimental. Then they added on to it another 5,000 SQFT. It was funny, BC, the old section had like 7F ceiling. The new one had 10F. They had a 16F tall basement and put in a small half pipe for skateboarding. Story 60. It's what you didn't see. From the road, it just looked like a well-paved driveway. The only way to tell you we're in the right place was that all the electrical lines went underground about 1.5 miles before the driveway and didn't come back up again for another 1.5 miles. You couldn't see the house, but apparently they had the power lines moved out of their view. Story 61. My BIL had an original Helmut Newton of Jodie Foster on the wall. I looked it up, it retails for around $20K. Of course, he's the head of cardiology at a major hospital, and there was a G-Wagon in the driveway, so there was also that. Story 62. When items in their house mean something, a gift, a story, a sentimental experience manifested into an object. You got the attention, you got the respect, you have a lot people thinking fondly of you. You are beyond financial wealth. Old wealth isn't flashy, it's handed down. On the other hand, you have so many things. Things to share, things for things, and the things don't matter, it's the conversations and time spent with. Story 63. My husband grew up solidly middle class and had told me my wealth meter is broken. I grew up below the poverty line, so rich to me is rooms in your house. I grew up in a shotgun house. Basically, each floor was one long, narrow hallway. Extra appliances. We didn't even always have a washer and dryer in our house, so anyone with a dishwasher or a wine fridge was obviously loaded. Rooms you didn't use. In my head, you have to be flush if you can afford a whole room that only gets used once a year or on the most special occasions. Having a horse. Horses are expensive and you need land, which is also expensive. Everything about horse is expensive. Books. Like loads of books. Fun anecdote. Very early in my relationship, I went to a family party with my husband, and there was caviar out with some of the cheese and crackers, and I was shocked. I pulled him aside and asked if he was way more loaded than he had let on. He proceeded to inform me you could get caviar at Walmart, and it was no indication of wealth. Story 64. My new NYC acquaintance suggested we meet at the theater, but I said, let's just walk over together. Then we won't have to worry about finding each other. This was the pre-cell phone era. So he gave me his address. When I got there, only one doorbell on the townhouse, first sign. Then those extra-long croquet mallets under the front hall bench. I had never seen polo gear. We ended up being pretty good friends, and I realized most of his acquaintances had no idea. That's the way he wanted it. Few people saw the house. Story 65. I spend a lot of time in very wealthy people's homes. Elevators, Ferrari, on a turning plate in a lit-up, fully glass-walled room. Famous artworks, wine caves that are bigger than my house, the Boston robotic dog things being used as toys in the gardens, 1,000 Japanese maple trees in their oriental section of their garden, indoor shooting range, chefs, stacks of cash, Lalique collections, Christmas ornaments that are over $1,000 apiece, and I hope I'm not giving too much away with this one, a UFO conservatory house. This was my lodgings for the event. Edit. This is in various homes, not just one house. Story 66. Went over for a party the day we graduated high school. We all went to school in very southwest part of the Sacramento Valley, which is already expensive, but this girl lived in Napa Valley. I pull up and immediately notice the property is gated, and there's a drive. Not a driveway, a drive. I park my car, get out, and knock on the front door. Her mom, who I've known for years since she was my mom's friend, answers and says, "Oh, it's right around the corner in the garage, sweetie. Have fun." The garage was an 8-car detached garage about a quarter-mile away from the actual house. It had a loft, an insanely good sound system, and a full working bar. In the garage. Story 67. My friend's dad owns a bunch of McDonald's and runs the corporate office in our state, and I was friends with his son. His dad and mom went out of town for a night, and my friend invited us all over for the Tyson Holyfield fight in high school. I'm 40 now. There were like 15 of us there, and his dad packed the fridge with Coronas and left a box of Cuban cigars, but also kind of hired a few older teenagers to kind of keep us in check. Also told everyone's parents what was happening. Nobody was allowed to drive home, obviously. The elder teens drank just a tiny bit and also had fun with us, but also slept over. Their house was an absolute mansion, obviously. I remember being 16, 17, not sure actually, and smoking my first cigar and sipping on a Corona on the back elevated deck, just shooting the with friends overlooking a lake, thinking, geez, so this is kind of the privileged life? We all got drunk, but mostly behaved. Also drunkenly made out with my crush at the time. And the babysitters did a good job. We all slept over in any and all rooms, and then the parents of my friend brought us all breakfast in the morning. All of our parents picked us up that late morning, and it was probably the best party I've ever been to. I passed out on the way home to my parents saying, "That's a one-time thing, by the way." The olden days. Story 68. Went over to a friend's in high school. We went to the 4-car garage to get the bikes out. OFC, he had an extra. And there was a Celine S7 in the garage along with a couple of SUVs and an empty spot. I asked what the empty spot was for. "Oh, the Lambo's in the shop." I thought he was fucking with me. Went back a few weeks later and there was a bright green Lamborghini Murcielago in the garage next to the S7. Story 69. The walls were covered with really significant original art. Lots of Dada and pop art. It's not just that this person could afford it. It was also proof of status and elbow rubbing in particular social spheres that really blew my mind. This was a much older person whom I was aware worked in the music industry, but his personal collections of things in his home made me realize he was really there and running with these amazingly influential people. Story 70. A friend's mom had her own walk-in closet of only Chanel items, sunglasses, hats, bags, etc. She had it insured for over $4 million too, which is crazy. Story 71. Original indigenous artwork. A totem pole in front foyer depicting the family of the owner, commissioned by a master carver from a very famous First Nations family. Story 72. Back when cable TV was a fairly new thing, going to someone's house who not only had cable but had all the channels. Then when big screen TVs came out and were expensive, my sister and her husband had a huge one. Story 73. My friend's parents owned that Diego Rivera painting of her holding the flowers as well, is the big famous Dali painting with the clocks, one of 7 copies or something like that. That was just the start of what made them seem rich though. Story 74. I was friends with a girl in college whose parents didn't just buy her an apartment, they bought the whole apartment building. When she graduated, they sold the building. A girlfriend of mine's parents would build a humongous house from scratch, live in it for a while, build another, then sell the last one. We dated for a few years, and by the time we split up, her parents were already building the 4th one to move into. Story 75. One of my neighbor's house had whole underground floor, with a giant main living room, dining hall, fancy stairs, and room. From outside, their house looked just like everyone else. They offered us a house tour before we left the city, and we were so shocked that all these years we didn't realize how big their house actually was. Story 76. I drove to a gated city, not a gated neighborhood, then up to a huge driveway with a bridge over the pond, to the gate that was the entrance to their property. Then, once past the gate, and over another bridge and another pond to a huge house that was probably 5,000 square feet. I parked in the huge circle driveway, and I noticed a lot of worker-type dudes walking around. Not 1 or 2, like 10, 15. As I walked up to the house, one of the workers greeted me. "Hello, sir. Are you visiting the stables today?" The house was actually their horse stables with a full-time equestrian staff. The real house was another half-mile up the driveway. It had a 10-car garage and, I'm not kidding, a 25,000 square foot building to hold his rare car collection. Yeah, felt like I was in a movie. Story 77. The weapons in their gun room. Only about 16 years old at the time, so just thought it was cool. The house was not a mansion or overly large, but now, after being in the firearms business for 30 years, I realized that gun room was worth 10 times the value of the house then. Now probably 100 times the value. Story 78. I was in a rich person's house one time. They had a piano room and a helicopter pad. They were a friend of a friend. Their rich dad was he didn't want us to touch anything in the house. He wouldn't leave us alone in a room like he was afraid we would break something. Also, we are girls. Not like we are going to roughhouse and knock something over at 19, 20 years old. Her dad was just weird and rich. Whole thing makes me sad thinking of it. Poor girl did not turn out okay from what I've heard. Her family expected her to live a certain way or they'd exile her from the family. Story 79. A friend of mine, who is brilliant at investing, sold his second company and decided to build his dream home. Finally, it reaches completion, and he throws a party to kick off the summer and show the house. He knows I love espresso, macchiato, etc. If it's Italian and coffee related, I love it. He sits me down at one of the 2 giant marble kitchen islands. He presses down on a part of the marble and up pops an entire Italian coffee machine that he had imported. He wanted it with the European 230 volts, so it would have the power to make the coffee exactly as it is made in Italy. He had his electricians install all of the equipment to make this possible, just for the coffee. The rest of the place was just incredible, unsurprisingly. Story 80. Was filming some content for a song release with the singer who was on the track. She invited me to her and her boyfriend's house for the weekend, so that we could just shoot as much content as possible and that her boyfriend could help film some of the bits we'd planned. Her boyfriend was a producer. I'd had a brief chat with him but didn't really know much about him. Walked into the house and the singer pointed me to the boyfriend's studio. Platinum, gold, silver plaques covered the walls from head to toe. Probably 20 plus platinum plaques. Songs that most of us would know. Songs that were staples when I was growing up. Real crazy stuff. Story 81. Low-level rich. A Steinway grand piano in the living room. No one in the house knew how to play, but the 4YO was going to take lessons. Oligarch rich. A dozen Bentleys, Rolls Royces, etc. In the garage, which was big enough for them.